So my name is Diana Bronson. I'm the Executive Director of Food Secure Canada, which is a national alliance of organizations and individuals working towards zero hunger, healthy and safe food and sustainable food systems. So I want to talk just a teeny bit about the moment, and some of you may have heard my presentation yesterday on national food policy or participated in that discussion, but that is the moment we're in Canada, where we have an opportunity at the national level to write a new food policy for Canada and articulate a new vision. And in my view, in our view at Food Secure Canada, institutional procurement has a really critical role to play in that. We're in the midst of a revision of Canada's food guide, and Food Secure Canada, amongst a number of other organizations, is trying to advocate for sustainable diets as part of the revision of that food guide, that we not only talk about the micronutrients in the food, but actually where the food comes from and how it is produced. And then, we've got an opportunity also to really think about, what are the policy supports, incentives, learning opportunities that we need in order to change the system as it is now, where institutions are not generally very favorable to the procurement of local food. So this is the big question. How can we use public sector institutions, schools, campuses, hospitals, long-term care facilities, and other public institutions to leverage that buying power to help support more resilient local food systems? Some of the rationales we have, there's an economic rationale. There's tremendous multiplier effects when small and medium-sized producers can access large institutional markets, and feeds in more resources to the local economy. In terms of the environmental impacts, we can reduce the food miles, have better life cycle assessments of what we're eating in institutions, and support sustainably produced food. And in terms of social impacts, we can consciously work to have more fairly produced food with decent wages and livelihoods for the people who are producing it. And of course, there's a deep connection between our food and our health, and yet it is a complete blind spot in most healthcare institutions, and I'll come a little bit more to that. So over the past 2 years, Food Secure Canada has worked in partnership with the McConnell Foundation on the 8 projects that Jessie will talk about, so I'm not going to go into great detail there. And that has led the way to a new program which is called Nourish, the Future of Food in Healthcare, and this is the reason why neither Jennifer Reynolds nor Beth Hunter from the McConnell Foundation can be here today, because they're in a strategic retreat with 25 champions that have been selected from healthcare institutions across Canada to work together to try and improve the procurement of local and sustainable food in their institutions. So that's just a little bit of what Nourish is. There's a website. You can go check out a little bit more what they're doing, but it's just being launched that weekend, which is why they're not here to talk about. Okay, so some of the problems at the very broad general level. So a small number of large corporations dominate. We have this, the food system and in institutions, and small, local, and sustainable producers have real trouble being able to distribute and to scale up their production to meet the needs of large institutions. In terms of food services, there's just a huge range of scale, knowledge, and facilities in schools, campuses, hospitals, and long-term care, and I think you'll see that from Jessie's more detailed presentations on the 8 projects. And they range from self-operated facilities, and I believe one person will talk about a self-operated facility, to large multinational food service management companies. Generally, food is not seen, even in the healthcare sector, as core to the mandate of the institution. So what ends up happening is it's the bottom line. How cheap can we get it? How fast can it be served? And of course, when that is your primary focus, it doesn't lead to necessarily to good food. And then very few institutions, not to mention provinces and countries and municipalities, actually have food policies. So we're not leveraging public institutions for public good when it comes to food. Here's a little bit of a landscape map of what's going on in Canada. As you can see, it's very, very unequal, and I'm not going to go into detail. We've done a series of different maps that are in draft form. This is currently under peer review, so you're sort of getting a sneak peek at it. But what you can see is there's a variety of different legislations and incentives in different provinces that do not really match up. So some have pending legislation, some have local food strategies, some have policies, directives, frameworks, some have actual programs, but it's very, very unequal across the country. I spoke about this yesterday. So for the first time, the federal government released to the public the mandate letters that it is giving to the different ministers in our federal cabinet. So the one that is really, really significant for all of us here at this conference was the instruction to the Minister of Agriculture, Lawrence MacCauley, to develop a food policy that would promote healthy eating and safe food by putting more high-quality food on the tables of families across the country. So that's good language. That's what Food Secure Canada is trying to leverage right now in our citizen engagement activities around a national food policy. But there's also an interesting mandate that we could use in the procurement work that so many people are doing, and that is in the mandate letter to the Minister of Public Services and Procurement, Judy Foote, and that is to modernize procurement practices so they are simpler, less administratively burdensome, deploy modern controllership, and so that's all, very well. But that support our economic policy goals, including green and social procurement. So if food is 1 in 8 jobs in Canada and an extremely strategic sector of our economy, and we can identify it as such, then we should have every rationale we need to get better incentives at the federal level to improve the social and environmental outcomes of procurement practices. I showed this slide yesterday as well, and I'm very fond of it because I think it really speaks to how the private sector and the government and civil society should work together. So governments have a mandate. They are elected with a mandate to do something. Civil society organizations like Food Secure Canada and many others that are here, we are mission driven. We are driven by our desire to see social change. And the private sector is driven by its margin. It is there to make a profit. And of course, there are overlaps in these different things. But I think what has happened in the procurement world is that the private sector margin has actually taken up all the space. And we're not getting the leadership that we need from public agencies and from government to really leverage the public market for procurement for public good, for positive social and environmental outcomes, including local resilient food systems. And despite the heroics of many people who are working on procurement and trying to change practices and do farm to fork and all of those things in institutions, it's still a relatively small force that needs to be strengthened. 3 ways to see procurement. This is mostly what we have, a status quo, lowest cost, best value. So the bottom line is how cheap can we get it and how fast can it be delivered. Social procurement, which looks at the qualities of the food that is sourced, so beginning to look more at local, organic, and fair trade goods coming into large institutions. And then a sort of next level of where we could go, where we have actually good food procurement. And so we're talking also about how the food is served, that it's healthy, it's delicious, it's engaging, people have choice, waste is diminished, and all of those other things.